My name is Quinn Meekum. I'm a professor of political science and the coordinator of the Middle East Studies program here at Brigham Young University. This is the second in a series of lectures that we hope will continue for some time between Brigham Young University and the University of Utah, where we are learning from one another and from the expertise that the faculty in these two institutions bring to the study of the Middle East and Middle Eastern history, politics, and religion. It's my great privilege to welcome to BYU today Peter von Sivers, who is an associate professor of history at the University of Utah. Professor von Sivers is an expert in classical Islamic history, in medieval and early modern Spain, in medieval and modern North Africa, in Islamic philosophy and science. He's widely published in the fields of world history. He has a number of book chapters and articles on topics such as Christology and prophetology in the early Umayyad Arab Empire, the rise of Balkan nationalism within the triangle of the Ottoman, Austrian, and Russian empires, 1800 to 1878, and has been quite involved in a number of questions regarding the early Islamic period, which we get to hear about today. His topic is on Islamic origins, specifically thinking about the religious debates that were taking place in the Middle East around the rise of Islam, and the role of those debates in the development of the Islamic community in its earliest stages. Islamic origins, for those of you who are not familiar, Islamic origins has become an interesting public and scholarly debate in recent years, trying to understand the remarkable success of this world religion and where it came from. What were the influences in early Islamic thought? And Professor von Sivers today is going to be discussing some early work from a book manuscript that he is currently writing on those Islamic origins. So please join me in welcoming Professor von Sivers to BYU.
Thank you, Quinn, for this very generous introduction that you have given. And I'm very happy to be talking to you and talking also to many of you who probably don't have much of a background on Islamic studies. But you will see then in the course of the talk that quite a few things that I will be talking about are very relevant also for the contemporary understanding. And particularly in the conclusion, I will address a few of these works. I'm giving you here a short outline, and then I will repeat this outline as I'm going along, so that you have a basic idea here that this will probably look a bit intimidating, but I am really focusing on only one point that I am pursuing in this book on which I'm working, and that is concerned with tritheism, which looms quite large in the Quran and in the debates of the 6th and early 7th centuries. So that's the a quick overview, and let me begin now. Professor Meekum briefly alluded to this already. Islamic origins have become very important in the last sort of 50 years. Or maybe even shorter than that, because the research that has been carried out on these Islamic origins is quite different from the traditional approach that was taken ever since the 19th century. In the 19th century, of course, with the beginning of academic research of Judaism and Christianity, was a period where scholars, usually secular in background, we're looking at the origins of the religions of Judaism, Christianity, and eventually also Islam. Now, in the case of Islam, this has been hampered for quite a bit because and even that is well known, of course, and also admitted by Muslims themselves, the Islamic sources date in general to 200 years after the first appearance of what we then later called Islam. So that means that these sources are or were written with a delay of a considerable amount of time, which meant then that all kinds of religious points of view, also various kinds of tribal competitions, tribal boosting and the like, were part of this Islamic tradition as it developed in 200 years later. And we do not have really a good access to the original documents or the events that we would be looking at through these documents going back 200 years earlier. So Orientalism, which is then the field that engaged in the research on Islamic origins, operated then according to the theory of, as I call it here, the onion peel theory, meaning you peel away layer after layer so that eventually you arrive at the historical kernel. That dominated the field until about 1980 and ended, unfortunately now in retrospect, in a disaster because you peeled and peeled and peeled, and as we know, onions don't have kernels, and so there was nothing once you had taken away all of the peels. That means there was a considerable crisis in Islamic studies, which were accompanied also by an enormous amount of polemics, people disputing each other's ability and the like, which has taken place. We are just barely coming out of this. I've been always trying to avoid these kinds of controversy because, of course, they lead to nothing and do not help in the actual research. But it's still going on, particularly in Europe, in Germany and in France, in England. There are vicious reviews of scholars of each other. So it's a minefield. It's a minefield, of course, also because what is happening in the Middle East right now is, of course, a resurgence of what one can call Islamic reformism. In other words, a form of Islam that was dominant maybe in the 900s, 1000s, 1100s, but not thereafter. And this kind of reform Islam emphasizes very strongly the historicity of this the events of 600, even though they are doubtful in their actual occurrence. So what scholars who have been now working during the last 50 years on Islamic origins are working with is the assumption of a context in which Muslims appeared in the course of the 600s, and this contextualism approach is the one that I'm also embracing. So my own project is involved with the sources that were contemporary to the rise of Islam in the 600s, which are mostly Christian in nature. Now, the interesting phenomenon exists also that the Quran itself, so the holy scripture of the Muslims, can be dated actually to the 600s, and recent carbon dating of some of these early manuscripts has even revealed the possibility that the Quran might have existed before the Quran, so 580 instead of the 620s, etc. Now, with that as a background, I would like to begin with, this is now contextualism, the approach that we can understand the rise of Islam only if we really have a good understanding of what happened among the or within the Christian denominations of the 500s. And we are talking there about vicious attacks of Christians against each other. The 500s weren't maybe quite as bad as the 400s, but they were still pretty bad. And you can see this in this particular title that I included by Philip Jenkins. Lengthy title, but it's, I think, a very descriptive one. And I recommend this book very much to you so that you have an idea here of what really went on before Christianity became what it actually was, with lots of assassinations, street riots, people being deposed from their bishoprics, and so on. So with that in the background, we need to understand that two councils, Chalcedon 541 and the Fifth Ecumenical Council of Constantinople 553, essentially set Christianity into its path, which then was also important for the 600s when